maa ngi tudd Cheikh Omar Ndong nekk chef de village de Djifer juddoo Diakhanor en 1969 li may wax ci érosion côtière ak changement climatique érosion côtière bi depuis ma xamali ko ba léegi dama gis ne géej gi day ñëw te ci li ma jot a dund gis naa ne fi ñu nekk yëpp àll la woon diggante 30 ans ba 40 ans rek gis naa ne lekk na loo xam ne mot na 200 mètres ci li nga xam ne mooy suuf si nga xam ne moom lañ doon béy. Au niveau de Diakhanor c'était en 87 dafa amoon raz de marée mu jël dëkk bi jël li nga xam ne moom la ñuy dundee lépp mu yóbbu ko. Au niveau de Djifer jusqu'à Sangomar tamit mu def fa embouchure bi bu njëkk moom motul woon sax 20 mètres mais boo ko xoolee léegi ay kilomètres la boo xoolee li nga xam ne moom mooy Djifer actuellement nii yàggul sax ci hivernage bi rek yóbbu na fi loo xam ne mot na ay 10 maisons yoo xam ne da leen a daaneel nga dem Palmarin Sam-Sam c'est la même chose kon nag gis nañ ne état bi mu ngi seetaan yàgg na.
kër yi nekkoon ci côté bële soo demee côté xel comme genn yëpp dañu wàcc si nii ndax fële yëpp géej gi jël na ko dañu amatuñu ay kër foofu.
Et ça, vraiment, nous, on considère que ce sont les conséquences des changements climatiques. Nous, lorsqu'on était petits ici, là, on n'a pas de problème avec les poissons. Il y en a tellement que parfois, les pêcheurs ont du mal vraiment à vendre leurs poissons.
Fii amatul dara dañuy bàyyi fii dem naw yi dañ fi doon jógee dem Mauritanie nii dem dugg dem clandestin loolu mooy andi jéey yooyu mais bu ma woon fii am na luñ jàpp kañ kenn du dem parce que nit ki moom toog say biir njaboot yar sa njaboot liggéey foofu amul lu ko gën.
Parce que ici, il y avait des années, il y avait beaucoup de poissons ici. Il y a pas mal d'espèces de poissons qu'on a ici au Bassey, mais actuellement, on ne les voit pas du tout. Notre seule ressource, c'est la mer. La mer ne donne rien du tout, les gens n'ont rien pour vivre. De ce fait, les jeunes se disent tout de suite qu'on doit aller en Europe. Et que là-bas, on peut espérer une vie meilleure, avoir de l'argent et l'envoyer ici pour que les gens puissent vivre. Actuellement, notre activité économique principale, c'est la pêche. Cette activité ne marche pas du tout.
Man demoon naa sax ba xat yoon ci géej gi demoon naa Espagne def naa Tenerife dem naa 3 fois de problème mu géej gi parce que boo demee géej doo am dara day gën a métti rek chaque jour mu gën a métti ma xam ne lii mënatuma ko dundee ma ne xaaral ma jéem a jëngu dem bu ma demee Tenerife nag 1 mois 10 jours laa fa def ñu refoulé ma bu ma ñëwee taal ma delluwaat sama métier mooy géej gi waaye ba léegi géej bi daal. amul changement day gën a métti rek.
Comme ils sont un peu habitués à la mer, ils se disent que braver la mer aller en Europe, ça ne fait rien du tout. Ce qui fait que donc ils sont tellement motivés par rapport à tout ça. Donc chaque fois, il y a des jeunes qui tentent, certains passent, réussissent, et d'autres ne réussissent pas, ils reviennent. Et même s'ils sont revenus, ça peut être encore pour retourner, c'est sûr.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this dialogue initiated by the RLS Climate Justice Program and co-organized with RLS West Africa and RLS South Africa. We are excited to have you with us today, and we hope that we will have an interesting dialogue. We have a rich set of panelists ready to present the topic. Now, we will have a quick presentation from Laura Geiger, who is the director of the RLS Climate Justice Program.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are, but I think it's mostly good morning and bonjour. Thanks, Roland, for the introduction. Yeah, I'm director of the Climate Justice Program of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, originally based in Manila, in the Philippines, but we were working internationally, and the aim was always the program of the climate justice, or the topic to engage and connect with organizations around the world, but also within our LS network, which is a huge network and offices we have around 25, also around the world. So we started or the question is why we are having these regional dialogues. We started with the Asian dialogues because that was where we were based originally a month ago with a webinar on climate migration, after having actually also a very successful conference last year on climate migration. We will post that also in the chat, the website again, for everyone who would like to see more of what happened at that time, what happened in the Asian dialogue a month ago. And that's already an announcement that we also will have some of our recordings and products also on that website. And so you really can use that as a resource for that topic. We will also have a dialogue on that for the Latin American region. So we really try to cover all the different regions on that specific topic. Why this topic? Climate migration, of course, especially labor migration, and now under COVID is discussed, but for some reason, climate migration is still a little bit, as we call it, an orphan issue. So it's forgotten, even though it's one of the most crucial aspects which happens due to climate change. It is difficult because sometimes it's overlapping. What are the root causes actually for migration? And it's a mixture. It is, of course, social aspects, labor aspects, peace and war conflicts. But since we know that also climate change is causing or emphasizing all of these other problems, it should definitely be given more attention. There are several United Nations bodies who do that already to a certain extent. For example, UNFCCC, we have the discussion there on loss and damages. But we discussed that several years already, and they're still stuck on the budget discussion. Who's paying actually for what, and who receives the money and how much. Hopefully after Biden, I just have to make a comment on that because I can't believe still that finally that happened. The US will go back, will rejoin the Paris Agreement, and hopefully that will also give an extra positive push for some of the negotiations. We'll see. There's another body, it's called the Global Compact on Refugees. And people who are displaced by climate change don't really fall into the categories of refugees under that body. So there's still the definition of course, people fleeing from political persecution, but climate change is not part of that. Then we have the third body, and that's an interesting one called Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, in short, the GCM, which already recognizes climate change as a driver of migration. And actually, this is where you have the mandate, or they are mandated to help address these economic and environmental, social causes, which drives people to leave their communities and countries. But still the question remains, how much space does that provide for discussion, and or is there space at all? Not only discuss, but really to negotiate for the rights of climate migrants. There's an interesting process at the moment, and this is actually also where we are really lucky to have this webinar is now, where there is a review process of the GCM, where actually governments and communities are encouraged to submit their demands or their status of migration, what they experience. I will say a few more words on that at the end of the discussion, but we really should use and should keep this in mind throughout the discussion today, and also that we can use that, at least a tiny little thing where we can, on a legal basis towards UN bodies, can make our voices heard. So for now, I wish us all a fruitful discussion, and I'm happy to hear the panelists. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. So now I'll hand over to Fatou to present to us the first speaker. Fatou?
Merci, bonjour tout le monde. Et merci aussi aux participants d'avoir accepté notre invitation. La migration et le changement climatique, en fait, sont deux facteurs liés, car l'une étant la plupart du temps la conséquence de l'autre. Et en Afrique, selon les différentes régions, l'interaction entre la migration et le changement climatique suscite de nombreuses problématiques liées à l'économie, à la culture, à l'environnement, etc. Alors, y apporter une réponse efficace nécessite de se donner l'occasion d'y réfléchir ensemble, mais aussi d'inviter les principaux concernés à y réfléchir avec nous, c'est-à-dire les acteurs qui y travaillent. Et au cours de ce webinaire, nous aurons l'occasion de partager les recherches du GERM à travers le professeur Ali Tandian, dont la réflexion sera axée sur le thème faute de nourriture, le voyage est notre seule alternative, ce qui va susciter bon nombre de questions. Par exemple, comment il va expliquer le lien entre la migration pour les besoins d'emploi, mais aussi la migration et le changement climatique. Quelles seront les conséquences au niveau des pays de départ et de destination? Nous aurons aussi Madame Yacine, Ndeye Yacine Dieng, de l'Association pour la valorisation de l'environnement. Et elle va développer l'aspect surtout communautaire et activiste à travers le thème communauté de Bargny, la migration comme moyen de survie, avec un certain nombre de questionnements qui va aller dans le sens de voir comment renforcer en fait le mouvement des migrants pour qu'ils luttent efficacement pour les droits des migrants climatiques. Ces deux premiers intervenants et intervenantes sont du Sénégal. Aussi, nous aurons comme intervenant du Nigeria, excusez-moi si je pêche sur le nom, Nnimmo Bassey, qui va développer le thème déplacé par le changement climatique, mis dans le conflit du désert. Et nous aurons aussi Madame Charlotte Anne-Louis Campo, qui va parler du lien entre le changement climatique, droits de l'homme et migration. Et elle va répondre à un certain nombre de questions dans le sens de ce qui suscite le pacte mondial sur des migrations sûres, ordonnées et régulières, et en plus de l'importance du changement climatique dans la migration, et quels seront les défis, ou bien quels sont même les défis et les mesures promues vers la protection des migrants, pour la protection des migrants climatiques en temps de pandémie. Là, ce seront les différents panélistes que nous aurons tout au cours de ce webinaire. Merci bien.
Thank you very much, Fatou, for introducing us to the rich panel of speakers who are going to give us answers to the questions that we have posed around this topic: when climate change impacts on human migration, Africa dialogue. Now, just before we go to the first speaker, I want to remind everybody that we have simultaneous interpreting going on. So if you wish to follow the debate in French only, you can go to the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen, select French and mute original audio if you want to follow the discussions in French only. And English is the default language, and so you do not really need to do anything. If you want to follow the English, you can also select and mute original audio if you are not getting the default floor language. So without further ado, we are going to go to the first speaker, the first panelist, who is Ali Tandian, who is a lecturer at the Department of Sociology, Gaston Berger University in Saint-Louis, Senegal. Ali, over to you.
Voilà, bonjour tout le monde. Est-ce que vous avez l'écran affiché?
Oui.
Oui, très bien. Je commencerai par remercier les organisateurs de cette rencontre. C'est une belle opportunité pour moi de partager les recherches que nous avions commencé à faire sur la question des changements climatiques et en rapport avec les mobilités. Mais pour aujourd'hui, nous allons nous limiter aux questions de migration. Et je trouve que c'est l'occasion également pour nous de refuser le temps de travail que veut nous imposer la COVID. Je pense qu'à travers le webinaire, on peut bien échanger sans forcément être dans les déplacements. Mais ce que je compte présenter aujourd'hui va porter sur les effets du changement climatique dans plusieurs secteurs et qui par conséquent oblige, je dis bien oblige, des populations à se déplacer. Donc pour commencer, la migration ici est présentée comme étant une contrainte. Ce n'est pas un choix pour ces populations, c'est une contrainte parce que ce sont des populations qui se retrouvent dans une situation de manque de ressources économiques, mais également de manque de capitaux au sens d'activités relationnelles. Comme ça se passe dans plusieurs espaces que nous allons exposer. Donc, c'est une étude basée, c'est une présentation basée sur la collecte de données qualitatives et quantitatives dans plusieurs espaces au Sénégal. Et cette étude commencerait par une méthodologie assez simple, une méthodologie basée sur la superposition de deux cartes. Une première carte qui va nous montrer les effets des changements climatiques dans plusieurs espaces du Sénégal. Et cette carte va être posée sur une deuxième qui va nous montrer comment ces populations, dans la difficulté, sont obligées de s'inscrire dans les migrations, qu'elles soient migrations internes ou bien des migrations internationales. J'insiste sur les migrations internes parce que, premièrement, en Afrique, 80% des migrants circulent à l'intérieur de l'Afrique. Deuxièmement, pourquoi j'insiste sur les migrations internes? Parce que celles-ci semblent être des espaces de test avant de rejoindre des destinations internationales. Je m'explique. Pour plusieurs populations sénégalaises, des villes comme Dakar, Thiès, Saint-Louis, des capitales administratives et économiques ou touristiques, sont des destinations où ces populations doivent se rendre, le temps de connaître ce que c'est que la solitude, le temps de connaître ce que c'est que la débrouille, le temps de connaître comment tisser des réseaux, bref, le temps de mobiliser un capital important que l'on appelle le savoir circuler. Donc voilà l'élément fondamental que je souhaiterais partager avec vous. Et les enquêtes que nous avions faites nous ont montré que dans plusieurs espaces au Sénégal, le changement climatique a occasionné une rareté ou bien une disparition de quelques ressources ou espèces animales dans plusieurs espaces, comme c'est le cas de Gandiol à Saint-Louis, de Ndjouch à Saint-Louis, de Nyokolokoba à Tambacounda. Et la disparition de ces ressources animales a occasionné une présence de moins en moins importante de touristes. Et par conséquent, les éco-gardes et populations locales qui vivaient du tourisme se sont retrouvés dans une sorte de dénuement économique. Il y a de moins en moins de touristes qui viennent parce qu'il y a une rareté des espèces. Et cette rareté d'espèces n'est rien d'autre dû au fait de la pluviométrie, au fait des inondations dans ces territoires, bref, au changement climatique. Le deuxième élément qui peut être évoqué et auquel nous allons discuter plus tard, c'est les ressources halieutiques. nous avons pu constater au Sénégal, au cours de ces dernières années, il y a de plus en plus des déplacements importants de bandes halieutiques, c'est-à-dire que des bandes de poissons, des richesses halieutiques quittent les côtes sénégalaises pour diverses raisons, parce que on a pu constater au cours des dernières années le taux important marine en termes de hausse. Et malheureusement, c'est une situation qui ne contribue pas beaucoup au développement ou bien à la reproduction des poissons. Et du coup, avec le déplacement des bandes halieutiques dû au changement climatique, des pêcheurs sénégalais sont obligés d'aller dans des espaces beaucoup plus lointains, comme c'est le cas de la Mauritanie, de la Guinée et du Libéria, pour trouver leurs ressources. Et malheureusement, par ces déplacements de bandes halieutiques, s'y ajoute ce qu'on pourrait appeler des conflits en latence, et parfois même des conflits manifestes. De plus en plus, on apprend que des pêcheurs sénégalais sont en bisbille, en difficulté avec les gardes-côtes mauritaniens. Et ce changement climatique également, qui a occasionné une montée des eaux de mer, a fait de sorte que plusieurs populations, surtout celles qui se trouvent sur la côte sénégalaise, et je rappelle que le Sénégal a une côte maritime qui se mesure sur 750 km, plusieurs villages qui se trouvent sur la côte ont perdu des territoires cultivables et malheureusement, c'est une des difficultés qui se présentent dans ces espaces. L'autre élément que je souhaiterais partager avec vous, c'est que ces changements climatiques, comme nous l'a dit cette personne qui a intervenu dans le film, à Differ, que des populations ont perdu des habitats, des populations ont perdu des maisons à cause de l'avancée de la mer et surtout de l'érosion côtière. Pour finir à cette description, je parlerai de l'élevage et de l'agriculture qui ont été fortement bousculés par des changements climatiques au Sénégal. En résumé, à travers cette carte, on voit que toutes les parties du Sénégal, qu'elles soient à l'intérieur comme à l'intérieur ou bien sur les côtes sénégalaises, toutes ces parties sont lourdement affectées par le changement climatique, soit par la salinisation des sols, soit par la raréfaction de la ressource des eaux, soit par la salinisation ou l'appauvrissement des sols, soit par la diminution de l'agriculture ou bien la dégradation des paysages pastoraux. Deux activités sont mobilisées ici du fait du poids qu'ils jouent dans l'économie, deux secteurs, l'agriculture et la pêche. L'agriculture qui mobilise 70% de la population active et plus de 10% du PIB. La pêche qui mobilise 2% du PIB et plus de 600 000 emplois directs ou indirects. Malheureusement, ces deux secteurs ont connu des difficultés allant vers la baisse de la production agricole jusqu'à une baisse de la production halieutique. Malheureusement, avec le changement climatique tel que vécu dans d'autres territoires, des chalutiers industriels viennent d'ailleurs pour venir pratiquer le plus souvent une pêche illégale à cause d'une demande mondialisée, occasionnant ainsi des difficultés pour de nombreuses populations pêcheurs du Sénégal. Et pour le dire d'une autre manière, plus de 20 000 pirogues sénégalaises sont en souffrance au cours de ces dernières années, occasionnant ainsi une pauvreté pour ces populations, transformant ces pêcheurs en simples ouvriers dans les chalutiers internationaux. Et cette situation a fait que, de plus en plus, pour ces nombreuses populations, la migration est devenue non seulement une contrainte, mais une obligation. Les changements climatiques sont devenus une contrainte, mais également une obligation d'aller vers d'autres territoires plus lointains pour se migrer.
Il reste une minute, Ali, une minute.
Oui, une minute. C'est ainsi qu'on pourrait dire que cette sorte de migration irrégulière s'est développée au cours des dernières années. Et malheureusement, ces populations qui partent sont confrontées à plusieurs difficultés parce qu'il y a un manque de bilan professionnel quand ils partent. Il y a un manque de précision dans le choix du projet professionnel. Il y a un manque de connaissances et de maîtrise de la langue dans les pays où ils partent. Voilà la difficulté que nous rencontrons chez de nombreuses populations victimes du changement climatique et surtout à travers l'agriculture et la pêche. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Ali, for the presentation. We note in Ali's presentation a number of things. Firstly, that migration really is a forced thing. It is forced migration caused by a number of important changes, ocean erosion, destruction of agricultural fields. And he also notes, for example, that Dakar, Thiès, and Saint Louis have become the cities that receive most of these migrants when they leave their villages, and they use these cities as a stopover for onward migration somewhere else. Ali also mentions that 80% of migration is internal in Africa and not to other continents. And also he talks about fishing, overfishing by companies and trawlers which come from other continents to fish in Senegalese waters. And so those are already some very interesting topics from which we can start thinking about some questions that we will ask Ali at the end. For now, we will move on to the second presenter, who is Nnimmo Bassey. Nnimmo Bassey is going to talk on the topic displaced by climate change, put into the desert conflict. Nnimmo, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Roland, and that was a brilliant presentation from Ali, and I will just go straight. And thanks to Rosa Luxemburg for creating this platform for us to discuss. I will be sharing my slides and trying to be as quick as possible since the time is so short. Yeah. So climate change really forces people to move, and that's the crux of the matter. That is the conclusion that my presentation is making, that people are not moving because they have a choice to move, but because they're forced to move, because they're forced to look for a life of dignity. In Africa, so we've already heard there are many factors making it impossible for people to remain in their communities: sea level rise, coastal erosion, desertification, loss of agricultural land, water stress, loss of livelihoods. And the migrations we've seen, the climate disaster pushing people both internally and externally. Yeah, so there are three ways that we can describe the movements that climate change is forcing people to undertake: some as migrants, some as displaced people, and some as refugees. And of course, there's some interrelationships between this kind of phenomenon. But sometimes people look at those who are forced to move by climate change as climate migrants. But when you use the term migrant, it almost sounds like these are people who have an option to move or not to move. People who are just looking for a better place to live in. But actually, we prefer to see those who are moved by climate change as those who are actually forced to move, who are actually refugees, not migrants. United Nations Framework Convention on climate change during the COP21 in Paris that ended up with the Paris Agreement set up a task force that would help to promote orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people. Now, the challenge we have with that kind of task force is that it's basically looking at migration as something that is optional. And if we look at migration as a means of adaptation to climate change, then we are forgetting that the climate crisis really is a climate justice crisis. We're forgetting the fact that people are actually forced. People are not just migrating, they're forced, they're displaced, they're forced to move. And we do know that there's been a resistance to label those who are forced to move as climate refugees, because the refugee, as defined by United Nations conventions, are people who are forced to move by warfare and other things, autocratic governments and so on and so forth. And I think the countries to where climate refugees move are looking for ways to resist, refuse to accept that people are forced to move by climate change. And so a lot of the discussions on movements due to climate change impacts have been colored by this kind of political consideration, because this economic consideration of not being willing to open the doors for people who are desperate, who are looking for how to survive. Now, to understand or to ground this issue, the basis for climate change is actually colonial. It's about grabbing of territories, about colonial ecology and agriculture. It's about neocolonialism, capitalism, exploitation, and the standardization of ecological cost in terms of production. And so we go back to look at the kind of deep exploitative productive systems, production systems, including slavery and colonialism, that led to production of a lot of course, the greenhouse gases that today has filled up the space in the atmosphere. So we shouldn't forget about this. And if we keep this in mind, it helps us to see that what we are actually confronted with today is really a refugee issue whose people whose possibility of adapting to unfolding situation has been destroyed by political, economic, and other bases. Yeah, we already mentioned the issue, the basic causes of global warming and the impacts of global warming on and why people become refugees, including sea level rise and so floods, desertification. So we just move on. To one example was in early 2009, Cyclone Ida and Kenneth hit Mozambique and that Southeast Africa coastline. That was really, that kind of disaster didn't give people an option about whether to hang around in neighboring territories or go somewhere else. Up to 1,000 people lost their lives. And when Cyclone Kenneth happened, 52 more people lost their lives. The damage caused by Ndeye was put at about $2 billion US. And then when we keep that in mind, we look at the green climate funding, how much money is available to support vulnerable territories. And we're finding that globally, the governments in the world, especially those who are most responsible for global warming, are not ready to bring out the money necessary to tackle the impacts of global warming. In November of the same year, that's 2019, Djibouti had 2 years worth of rainfall in one day, and up to 150,000 people needed humanitarian assistance from just one rainfall. So the impacts of global warming can be so drastic that people who manage to survive just have to move somewhere else. They have to become refugees somewhere else. Look at the issue of Lake Chad at northeastern Nigeria, shared by Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, and Chad. Between the early 60s and now, the lake has lost about 90% of its original size, and up to 2.6 million people, if not more, have been displaced because of the shrinkage of Lake Chad. Farmers are not able to farm in the area, fishers have been moved, the pastoralists have been displaced. And the problem with this also is compounded by that of conflict. I'm showing a map of Nigeria. The whole of northeastern Nigeria is a very precarious area because of conflict, and the climate change is contributing to this. pushing pastoralists to move southwards, and moving southward means they have to have conflicts with farmers by destruction of farms and conflict with their heads and so on. And all this is caused by triggered. A major contributor is global warming. And then still look at the map of Nigeria. Southern Nigeria, especially this area of the Niger Delta, is where oil is being extracted. So you have a lot extreme pollution here, and people are forced to move up and forced to move down, and some are forced to move out of the territory completely due to global warming. So you have this network of Africans looking for how to escape from Africa to Europe, not because they just want to move to a new environment, but because global warming is making it impossible for people to remain in their territories. And so we have to always keep that in mind. Now, one of the major drivers of global warming is the extraction and burning of fossil fuels. And we're having fossil fuels find gas, oil, coal all over the continent. We just heard about discovery of oil and gas and possible fracking in Botswana and Namibia in protected areas. We have protected areas being extracted, exploited for oil in Uganda and elsewhere. And we're having a lot of offshore oil, including offshore Senegal and around the entire continent. So, and the more this is extracted and burned, the more climate impacts on the continent of Africa. We have a map showing that if all the oil that is already found in Africa is burnt, extracted and burnt, all the fossil fuels, we cannot keep to the 2-degree target of the climate agreement or Paris Agreement. And then if the new found oil and gas and coal are added to the existing ones, then of course the temperature target is totally fiction. So global warming, climate refugees, and extraction of fossil fuels, extraction and burn of fossil fuels are they're intricately connected, they're linked all together. Already we're having challenges that shows that if global warming continues, 20% of the land in Africa will become or not so usable for farming by 2080, and permanent reduction in per capita consumption by this, if we have the 2 degrees temperature target, will be reduced by 4 to 5%, and more areas become arid and semi-arid, which means that by this year, it's also known that by this year, up to 250 million Africans may face water stress. All these are factors triggered by global warming, and the outcome is driving people out of their territories. And then when we look at the
1 minute,
deaths,
Nnimmo.
1 minute, extreme weather events, heat waves, floods, droughts, and so on, are actually human rights issues that we ought to look at. So the struggle by Africans to stay in their territories, to do agriculture and live in dignity is subverted by the rise of extractivism, especially of fossil fuels across the continent. And this is also driving global warming. So we have a vicious circle: global warming, extractivism, increased global warming, and then people are forced out as refugees. And we just have to take this as something that we cannot overlook. Global warming is driving creation of more and more refugees, especially from Africa. And we have to go to the root of the problem, stop depending on extractivist activities for development and for economic activities.
Thank you very much, Nnimmo, for this presentation. And we note 3 things. Firstly, climate change is really a forced thing. It is not, people are not moving because they just want to get somewhere better to live. They are forced to leave their original homes. He also mentions 3 types of movements: movement of migrants, movement of displaced people, and movement of refugees. And obviously, we also have the component of the fact that the Paris climate change agreement talks about a task force for orderly migration, but is this really possible? What is really driving this task force is the political and economic considerations behind that, obviously, to continue the externalizations of destructive production and so on. And there is also another component which has been headline news in West Africa for a long time now, which is the conflict between farmers and pastoralists, which has seen many deaths in the eastern part of Nigeria. And we will ask Nnimmo to shed some more light on what he has presented towards the end. Please remember that you can drop us questions in the chat function. We will collate all these questions and ask the panelists to shed more light on some of these topics towards the end. We appreciate some of the comments that are already coming in. Without further ado, we will now move on to Charlotte and Louise Campo, who is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, West Africa Regional Office. Charlotte, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Roland. Let me start thanking the organizers for inviting me to this really interesting webinar. I'm not a UN High Commissioner, that would be too much to say. I'm working as an associate human rights officer for the Office of the High Commissioner in West Africa. So I'm based in Senegal, and we cover the region, West Africa region, just until Chad, let's say, including the Sahel region. And my office, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, has the mandate within the United Nations to work towards the protection and promotion of human rights of all people in the entire world, irregardless, of course, of their gender, of their nationality, of their migration status, etc. And within the office, we have been starting really reflecting on these interlinkages between human rights, climate change, and migration in the past 5 years, let's say. And our first researches in that matter really shows the urgency to work on this. And so in the office management plan for 2018-2021, we included it really as a specific focus. And if we look at the first work that we have been doing around this thematics, like the main conclusion we can make, let's say, is it is very, very complex. And I think that the other speakers, and thank you also for the other speakers and their amazing presentations, because it's a great honor to be around you and to see so many experts on the topic. So very pleased to be part of that. But what they have also been mentioning is indeed the difficulty, the complexity of these different drivers for migration, let's say. When we talk about displaced people in the context of migration, in the context of climate change, we talk about an average of 26 million a year that are internally displaced because of sudden onset disasters. This number is huge already, but doesn't even include the consequences of slow onset disasters, of those people who see their grounds not being viable anymore to produce foods, to see the desertification, the sea level rise, all these slow onset disasters that make people forced to move and to look to different places to live. And when we talk about human rights, let's be very clear, this touches upon all the human rights of these people. We talk about lack of access to water, to food, to having to leave their houses, there where the ancestors have been buried. Access to participation into their communities has left increased discrimination, increased violence. So we see an enormous amount of consequences to the human rights of these people. And if we look further down, we see, of course, that those that are already the most vulnerable are disproportionately affected by these types of crises. So we talk about elderly people, people that are having difficulties already to move, that having to leave their houses, that are in bad shape or having bad medical conditions, women, children, ethnic groups, etc. So what from our office is really important is to focus on this human rights-based approach to issues like climate change and migration, and to make sure that we have that focus in our response plans. And when we assist states, that is also the focus they go into. And Laura, at the start of this webinar, already mentioned quite some UN initiatives, agreements, global agreements like the Paris Agreement, but others as well, the Ndeye framework, for example. They have that same approach. They focus on these human rights angles in trying to address the consequences of climate change. And what does that mean, a human rights-based approach, for those who are not very familiar to it? That means that the state is the main duty bearer. The state has the duty to protect, respect, and promote the rights of all the people in their territory and their nationals abroad. The people, the communities we're talking about, are rights holders, and they should be empowered to claim their rights. They should be part of the solution. They should be consulted and encouraged to find these solutions. What we try to do here is, within the framework of human rights, climate change, and migration, to first see what can we still do to avoid communities, groups, to be forced to make this move, to be forced to look for a viable life outside of their place. And there it's important that we assist also states in drafting mitigation plans, drafting action plans that make sure that we don't contribute to further migration. You see, that we give their communities their right to land and give the communities the chance to stay where they are and where they feel home. For those where it's too late, and for these plans, like for those groups of people that will have to move in the future as well, because of climate disasters, we need to make sure that they are that they're protected within that move, right? And that they have all the chances to also make choices on where they go, how they manage these changes, etc. And I want to refer to what Laura already also, and some other. I have 1 minute left. That's not so much. I want to refer maybe quickly to the international frameworks, because we saw indeed it is not part of this general definition of refugee within the convention at this time, but we do see small lights in the progress made and how we think about these forced displacements and the importance of international protection of these people. And for example, on the 7th of January, the Human Rights Committee, who basically analyzes the political and civil rights of people, have pronounced itself on a first climate case within the United Nations. And it was a man from Kiribati who went to the Human Rights Committee to ask for a violation of its right to life, because within 10 years' time, his land would be gone. What the Human Rights Committee said is, it's still time for the state to act, so it's not yet a violation. So we cannot accept a violation to that regard at this moment, but it potentially could be a violation of your right to life. If a state doesn't act upon it, this is a violation of your right to life. So you see, like the little contributions, the reflections that are made, because it's clear that these people need international protection, whether or not it's within the Geneva Convention or another type of international protection. But if I have one last minute, because they asked me also about the Global Compact on migration and on COVID-19. One little thing about COVID-19, of course, COVID-19 limits mobility. And so what do you have in the context of climate change? This migration was a resilience strategy that is now disrupted. So you see that actually COVID-19 became a threat multiplier in this context of climate change and forced migration. And on the Global Compact of migration, exactly on the global level, it has been identified as one of the main topics to work on climate change and migration. So at this point, regional on the regional level, on the national level, networks are starting to build their work plans, and also within the region of West and Central Africa, we have been working towards a work plan that also includes these thematic areas. And it will be important to have a consultation process where also stakeholders, actually all of you, could enter this discussion and make sure that climate change is part of the priorities within this UN network of migrations work and within the regional processes. So I invite you all to assist to that as well, and I will share invitations on that. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for the presentation. And two things come out clearly, which I will just mention. The fact that human rights, the human rights-based approach is something that the UNHCR is, and the OHCHR is trying to prioritize over the next few years, and the fact that the state is the main duty bearer, that is one, and the people are the rights holders. And to assert their rights, let's remember that the human rights approach tries to look at access to participation, access to food, access to water, access to land, etc. And also the fact that we already have people who have approached the United Nations to access their full rights to all these resources. And the first case that was heard, which Charlotte mentions, is from a man from Kiribati, and who would love to see if this can be used as precedent for future cases. Now, Fatou, maintenant, est-ce que tu peux nous faire l'honneur, une fois de plus, de présenter Madame Ndeye Yacine, qui va faire la dernière présentation, donc quelqu'un qui vit déjà les effets du changement climatique et qui peut nous présenter son témoignage. Fatou, est-ce que tu peux nous faire cet honneur?
Je dis bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour, chers participants. Bonjour, chers panélistes. Je me nomme Yacine Dieng, présidente avec Association pour la valorisation de l'environnement et des côtes. Donc, au Sénégal, nous avons 700 km de côtes. Mais ma ville, Bassey, est à 32 km de la capitale du Sénégal. Nous sommes une zone très menacée par le réchauffement climatique. Bassey fait partie des 4 zones les plus vulnérables face au changement climatique. Il y a des années, la mer était très loin des communautés. Je peux dire à 500 mètres des communautés. Mais maintenant, la mer avance à grands pas. Il nous menace, il détruit nos maisons. Tout l'océan avance de 1 mètre à 3 mètres par an, causant d'énormes dégâts d'habitation, de matériel de pêche et sur notre économie locale. Plus de 600 familles ont perdu leur maison. Nous n'avons pas de quoi nous adapter. Parce que des vagues de 3 à 2 mètres qui traversent des maisons pour se jeter derrière, nous n'avons pas de quoi nous adapter. Nous n'avons que des sacs de sable et des pneus et des débris des maisons tombées que nous faisons sur le devanture de nos maisons. Nous n'avons aucun aide de l'État. Nous n'avons aucun aide des bailleurs ou autres. Et en plus, seule la mer nous aide. La mer n'a plus de poissons. On n'a plus rien. Parce que qui sait Bargny savait que Bargny se nourrissait de la pêche, de l'agriculture et de l'élevage. Mais maintenant, on a pris tous nos terres. On avait bénéficié du maire précédent des parcelles pour abriter les victimes de l'érosion côtière les plus menacées face au changement climatique. Mais malheureusement, c'est là qu'on a mis la centrale à charbon. Plus de 1433 parcelles ont été accaparées par la centrale à charbon. C'était le seul site qu'on devait aller pour nous réfugier sans que pour autant subir ces conséquences que nous sommes en train de subir. Le plan PANA avait cité Bargny comme les 4 zones les plus vulnérables face au changement climatique. PANA, ça signifie plan d'adaptation national face au changement climatique. On a vu Dounbabé à Saint-Louis disparaître. Donc, Bargny, ma ville natale, risque de disparaître et que je ne souhaite pas. Donc, on a vendu la mer, on l'a donnée aux grands bateaux qui viennent expirer nos ressources, nos ressources. Ces grands bateaux étrangers qui viennent nous expirer nos ressources. Et c'était la seule chose qu'on avait pour acheter, pour travailler, pour acheter des maisons, pour acheter de quoi nous nourrir et pour acheter de quoi nos enfants ont besoin d'aller à l'école. Sur ces genres de choses, nous les femmes sommes plus vulnérables. Parce que nous les femmes, c'est nous qui restons dans les maisons, faire l'éducation, préparer les repas pour les enfants. Les hommes vont au travail et c'est nous qui restons à la maison pour gérer les enfants. Nous n'avons plus d'habitation, nous n'avons plus de quoi nous nourrir. Et dans une maison, tu vois, de 6 à 8, même 10 personnes dans une même chambre. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on n'a plus où aller. Nos maisons sont détruites et on n'a pas l'aide de l'État. Donc c'est difficile pour les enfants, pour nos fils. Ils n'ont plus l'espoir de rester au Sénégal. Ils risquent leur vie. Pour eux, c'est un mal. Or que ce n'est pas un mal. On les a forcés. Parce qu'un lieu où c'était destiné à l'habitation, on l'a réduit en site d'industrie. C'est difficile. On n'a plus de solution. les enfants, pour eux, c'est un mal. De voir l'aggravation de la situation, de la pauvreté, ils n'ont pas de quoi nourrir leur famille. Pour eux, l'immigration, c'est une solution. Ce n'est pas une solution, mais c'est une contrainte. Ce phénomène devient de plus en plus mal. Ce phénomène devient de plus en plus... Je ne peux pas... Si je commence vraiment, j'ai mon cœur. En une semaine, plus de 240 personnes ont disparu dans les eaux. C'est difficile. Et nous n'avons pas les moyens de s'adapter, de prendre nos parcelles, on est réduit au néant. Et nos enfants sont allés faire l'émigration, or ils pouvaient rester parce qu'on avait des terres pour cultiver, on avait des terres pour habiter, on avait la pêche qui était abandonnée. Les poissons étaient beaucoup au Sénégal, mais il n'y a plus rien. Les enfants sont disparus dans les eaux parce qu'ils n'ont rien, ils n'ont pas de moyens de survivre. Pour eux, c'est un mal nécessaire. Et seule l'émigration peut les... Or que ce n'était pas ça. S'ils étaient face à ces choses, ils devaient le lutter noblement, mais pas de prendre les bateaux pour l'Europe. Moi, ce que je souhaite et ce que je demande aux États africains et internationaux, de nous laisser nos terres pour cultiver. Parce que plus de 600 hectares, le port minéralier et fractier a pris 600 hectares. La centrale a pris 120 hectares. L'usine de fer sidérurgie, Tosaili, a pris 100 hectares. Donc, qu'est-ce qui nous reste? Il ne nous reste rien. Les enfants, nos enfants sont obligés de se périr dans les eaux. Et c'est difficile. Nous disons aux États de supprimer tout ce qui est investissement des méga projets charbonniers, de se focuser sur les énergies propres. Je dis en bas les énergies sales. Parce que les énergies sales, c'est eux qui s'aggravent sur l'avancée du changement climatique. Nous disons aux États, vraiment, nous disons aux États de donner la chance à nos enfants, de leur donner leur terre, de leur donner ce qui leur appartient pour qu'ils puissent travailler librement et noblement, mais pas de jouer sur leur futur pour qu'ils puissent périr dans les eaux. Je dis en bas à ces projets, de donner nos terres à nos enfants pour qu'ils puissent vivre noblement chez eux. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Madame Dieng. Thank you so much for this very powerful testimony, which really brings to life the direct consequences of climate change on people's lives. And she has spoken, for example, about 240 people dying in 1 week, in the space of 1 week, because they are migrating for a better life. And she talks about different international projects that takes away the land which they used to use as a safe space whenever there were powerful storms and so on. an iron ore plant, a mineral plant, and a power station, which have taken away more than 2,000 hectares. And this is with the complicity of the Senegalese state. And we are going to have some questions on this issue later. And just very quickly, our colleague Ibrahima from the RLS Senegal office has made a video on this. And Ibrahima, if you could please share the link to the video in the chat box, that will be nice. Now, we will have some very quick questions which have been coming in. The first question that was asked, for example, was from Naja, who wants to know if we can share. I think it's this question is to Ali. Do you have any data on international migration versus national, local, in-country or Africa level migration? The second question is, what are the common perceptions of African governments on fossil fuels? Third question, how does the UN Commission of Human Rights play a role to highlight human rights in UNFCCC processes? That is a question from Aliyah. Another question from Naja, how can development financing agencies support? A question which Nnimmo has already started answering, but which we can still ask the panelists. What needs to be done so that social movements are more aware of climate change? So I will just quickly hand over to Ali. Please, could you keep your answers short, 1 minute each, so that we take a full round of answers, and then ask questions again during a second round. Thank you.
Bonjour, merci pour les questions évoquées. S'agissant des données sur les migrations, c'est un peu difficile d'avoir des données exactes parce que ce qui s'est le plus développé, ce sont les migrations irrégulières qui ont pris forme depuis plusieurs décennies. Le deuxième élément, la question des migrations régulières, on nous avance des chiffres, on parle de plus de 200 000 Sénégalais, mais c'est de loin plus que cela. La difficulté qui se pose aussi bien en Afrique que dans d'autres pays, c'est la question de mesure des départs, parce qu'il y a la porosité des frontières qui justifie cela. Deuxième chose, c'est tout ce qu'il y a comme fantasme qui entoure le voyage en Afrique. Voilà la difficulté qui se pose pour avancer avec précision sur les données des migrations au niveau du Sénégal. Merci. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
Bon, on va d'abord passer à Nnimmo et on va revenir vers vous, Ali.
Okay, thank you so much. I was sure Ali would answer that question, and he has done so. So one of the challenges we have is that there are a lot of migrations within Africa from one country to the other. So that these are also internal displacements, external displacements, or those within the continent. Some information somewhere, but so yeah, basically that's what I would like to say about this.
Nnimmo, there is a second question which you might want to answer. What are some of the common perceptions of African governments on fossil fuels? For example, as opposed to green energy, which Madam Ndeye Yacine was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I spent all my life, almost all my adult life, fighting this issue of African governments depending on fossil fuels. And the problem is getting bigger rather than getting less. Because oil is now being found, oil and gas is now being found almost everywhere on the continent. It's like the continent is floating on oil. And really, we also all know that the exploitation and utilization of this resource is creating more problems for the world in terms of global warming, displacement, and more problems for Africa, because we are one of the most vulnerable places on the planet, apart from the Pacific island states, the small island states. And so the issue is always, African governments believe that it's their right. African politicians, they believe that it's their right to get the resources, the money, not really the money. They're looking for the money to spend. They're looking for the money, not caring about what happens to the future, in the future. What happens to our children and children's children? Where would Africa be? You get all the dollars today, and then you burn the future. This is a big challenge. So the African government completely, I would say 199% are all for extracting and burning fossil fuels. This makes it even more difficult for citizens to counter this desire with new narratives, which I see as what we should focus on. Sharing the stories of the impacts, sharing the what will happen in future. Because even the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Conference of Parties, are discussing not how to stop the pollution, the burning of this resource, but how to capture the carbon in the atmosphere. So you bring out the carbon first, then you make some engineering solutions to capture the carbon. And we do know that the negative impacts will still be on Africa, more on Africa. For example, putting mirrors in the sky to reflect heat, putting sunshades in the sky, whitening the clouds. All those things, there's a power relationship. Those who promote those kind of technologies, first of all, secure themselves. Those who suffer the impacts are the powerless. And so it's going to come back to us. And African governments really need to think very seriously about the route to what progress they're looking for and what we want to do, live for generations yet unborn.
Thank you, Nnimmo. Now, Charlotte, how does the UN Commission on Human Rights and other UN agencies play a more visible role to promote the human rights aspect? And how do we bring together the efforts of all the UN processes for more visibility and better impact?
Thank you, Roland, and great question, of course. First of all, with regards to the activities of our office and our High Commissioner, she has been playing a really a big role in participating to the UNFCCC. She has been the first High Commissioner, for example, to participate in the COP in 2018. There are actually a lot of submissions that she made, an open letter to the member states outlining priorities for action in from a human rights-based approach. I can give you the links to show a little bit what she has been trying to move in terms of human rights, climate change, and migration. Also, for example, last year's International Human Rights Day, she made a special statement on youth and climate change and human rights, for example. So I'm happy to share some links with you. I will do that in the chat on the contributions that she made to these processes. In terms of how we can coordinate all these different actions, I think it's a very valuable point, and it's something we have to be very aware about, because there's so much happening at the same time. Everyone sees the urgency of the issue, but we risk to fall into just organizing a lot of different committees and organizations and agreements without coordinating and interacting. So from our side, for example, what is really important to the GCM work, so on the Global Compact of Migration and organizing these UN networks on migration, is really to ensure that all stakeholders are involved and that the messages and the work and the negotiations that happen on other levels within the UN and on the levels of the member states on climate change, that these are really included in the work that the UN Network on Migration does, both on national, regional, and global levels. So what we are very much insisting on is this really participatory process where we do have climate change experts part of the discussion at any stage. So that's definitely something we're aware about and trying to make sure that we are complementary in all of these processes and that we build on the work that has already been done so far.
Thank you, Charlotte. And I'll just ask Ali and Madame Dieng once again. We obviously know the stories about overfishing on Senegalese shores. First to Ali, from a research point of view, what is the output that has been produced and in order to get the Senegalese government to see this as a social problem, as a major crisis? And to Madame Dieng, what is the effect? What are some of the other effects of overfishing as well as ocean erosion on social structures within your community? Because with this migration, we also see a breakdown of social structure.
Merci beaucoup pour les questions. Je dirais que à travers notre équipe de recherche, nous avions récemment réalisé des activités au niveau de la ville de Saint-Louis pour rencontrer des populations qui s'activent dans la pêche. Et nous avions eu l'occasion de leur donner la parole. C'est la difficulté qui se pose, c'est que en Afrique, le plus souvent, on ne donne pas la parole aux populations victimes, qu'elles soient femmes, jeunes ou pêcheurs. Et avec le think tank que nous avons mis en place, qui s'appelle Observatoire sénégalais des migrations, nous avons donné la parole aux pêcheurs pour qu'ils nous disent réellement comment ils vivent cette difficulté avec la présence de chalutiers internationaux. Nous avions fait cela parce qu'au-delà de deux populations qui sont les plus victimes du changement climatique, à savoir les femmes et les jeunes, il faut en rajouter deux autres, à savoir les personnes qui ne disposent pas de capitaux professionnels reconnus, c'est-à-dire qu'à travers le savoir livresque des diplômes, le quatrième groupe de personnes qui vivent en difficulté, ce sont des populations qui ne disposent pas de capitaux scolaires. Et à travers les activités que nous faisons, nous donnons la parole à ces populations en discours simple et saisissable, comment ils vivent le changement climatique et par quels canaux ils peuvent développer des activités pour revendiquer leurs droits. Parce qu'il ne faut pas perdre de vue que la migration telle qu'elle est vécue avec le changement climatique entraîne beaucoup de difficultés en termes de connaissance d'abord des droits humains. Merci.
Merci Ali. Oui, Madame Yacine.
Bon, nous n'avons pas de solution à ce problème. Parce que tout ce qui se trouve au Sénégal, c'est de l'argent. Mais nous n'avons pas d'argent. Si nous avons de l'argent pour s'adapter avec des pneus ou bien des sacs remplis de sable, ce ne serait pas le cas. Ou bien des débris, des maisons tombées que nous mettons sous les devantures de nos maisons. Si nous avons des moyens, nous savons les statistiques qu'on peut prendre, les digues de protection sont là, les brise-lames sont là, et d'autres moyens pour s'adapter, mais nous n'avons pas d'argent. Pour payer notre scolarité de nos enfants, c'est un problème, parce que seule la pêche nous pourrait venir en aide et la transformation des produits halieutiques. Parce que je peux dire à Barni, 70 à 80% du produit local, c'est la transformation, la pêche. Donc, l'État ne nous ont pas venus en aide. C'est eux qui peuvent faire des brise-lames ou bien de déplacer les victimes les plus menacées par l'érosion côtière. Mais comme la mairie nous avait donné des parcelles, 1433 parcelles, si l'État nous avait laissé avec nos terres, nous ne subissons pas ce que nous subissons aujourd'hui. Nous ne subissons pas ce que nos enfants sont en train de se périr dans les océans. Donc nous disons à l'État de regarder, parce qu'on a tout écrit. On a écrit au président, ministre de l'Environnement, tout ce qui est structure, on a tout écrit, mais rien n'a abouti. Seul ce que nous avons écrit au plan international qui a abouti. Parce qu'une centrale qui ne respecte pas les normes environnementales et sociales, qui ne respecte pas les droits des hommes, qui ne respecte pas les 500 mètres, donc ce n'est pas un projet. Ils disent que nous refusons les projets de l'État, mais ce n'est pas le cas. Si respecter les droits de l'homme, ce que les textes et les règles ont appliqué, comme l'article L13, ça ne serait pas comme ça. Mais ils ne respectent aucun droit. Donc, si nous avons des moyens, nous allons prendre nos terres pour ne pas souffrir comme nous le faisons en ce moment. Nous sommes fatigués. Si le mois d'octobre, août, septembre, nous vivons le calvaire de voir nos maisons englouties dans les eaux, parce que ça peut se passer comme les autres, comme le village de Saint-Louis. Parce que nous avons vu des mosquées, chez moi, des mosquées qui étaient à notre devanture, des terrains de football, des cimetières, tout est englouti dans les eaux. Donc c'est à notre tour de venir. Donc si nous n'avons aucun moyen, aucun aide de l'État.
Merci, Madame Dieng. I'll now hand over to Ibrahima, who has been very active in organizing this webinar, but who has been very quiet in the background until now. Ibrahima, please, you can come in.
Just want to say hello to everybody, to thanks anyone who has attended this this webinar. I'm very proud of having someone like Nnimmo Bassey here from Nigeria. She's also my partner from RLS. Ali Tandian also, with whom we have worked on migration in South Africa. And it was very important so to have someone from the grassroots, you know, that was the Yacine, who has expressed herself really with emotion, with so that you see that she's living climate change. She's not reading climate change on seminars and so, but it is a daily thing that she's confronting every day. You know, that a matter of surviving, a matter of livelihood. You know, and I think I'm really thankful for everybody who has accepted to be part of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahima. We are going to collate the remainder of all the questions and then try and reach out to Ali and Nnimmo and Charlotte and Madame Dieng to try and get more feedback from them. This webinar has been recorded, and so the link is going to be shared to all of you. We are drawing to the end of our discussion today, and I will now hand over back to Laura for some final remarks and a way forward. Yes, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Roland, and thanks to everyone for this very, as you said, emotional and impactful inputs from everyone. So I still have several aspects in my head, and yeah, I think we're all sorry that we kind of running out of time. We could have continued with the discussion for sure. Something like emphasizing on it's not a choice to go. Climate change really forces the concept or the aspect of extractivism, and it's not just reduced to purely climate change, but it's much bigger the problem. And we maybe even talk about ecological refugees and not just climate refugees. The definitions of whether it's refugees, migrants, what are the rights connected with this, and where to put this, where to define all this. I just wanted to come back also what Charlotte said, and I in the beginning, that we really have to use the space which is given, the tiny space which is given to speak out. and talk about the situation and also not what's happening at the moment, but then also what is needed for migration and dignity. So deciding where to go, what rights have to be claimed. So these are just a few aspects, and Roland already mentioned that and summarized them. I just wanted to emphasize one more time on the possibility on the GCM submission, because they're asking for innovative policies, practices, but also for gaps which we already experienced. And they also have actually a special call for young people, young leaders. We sent these links around that they also contribute to that. So, and of course it is much stronger, our attempt, if instead of just several organizations, communities, if we somehow come together and make a strong statement. Therefore, there is the offer or the proposal from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation that there will be an outcome report produced from these several webinars I mentioned in the beginning, 3 in total, and that should serve as a base for a possible GCM submission. So if you're interested in to collaborate with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation on that, please get in touch with us. We also will send the email addresses again to Ted Laurent, was also doing a great job in the background here, supporting the webinar, and will be in the lead for the outcome report. And also you can come back to me. So we are looking forward that this this possibility will be used. I mentioned in the beginning also there will be another webinar on the Latin American region. And as Roland said correctly, and I saw the link several times popping up in the chat, our Climate Migration Forum.net website, there will be all the products, all the updates will be collected, as well the presentations. So don't worry, we make sure you don't miss anything. So one more time, thanks to everyone, again, also to the ones in the background. And if you're interested in, you're welcome to stay for a few more minutes online. We still have another really important, powerful animation on migration, which is also translated already into several languages. And we're happy if you share that. Yeah, and we would like to end, definitely too little time, but it was good what we could achieve for now. So I would say thanks again, and would hand over to that the animation could be played. Thank you.
Laura as well, if everyone could please switch on their videos so that we see you all. So it's not a goodbye. While we see you all, please also stay on for the short video.
I don't really know how I survived, but I know why my family died. My name is Joanna, and I come from Tacloban. We were at ground zero. I lost my father, mother, brother, sister-in-law, and 3-year-old nephew to the storm. My story is repeated many times over. Because of climate change, extreme weather events are happening globally with more intensity and frequency. More and more communities are displaced and forced to move in search of safety and security. had to leave the land of our birth, our ancestors' graveyards. We leave our way of life and go to a place that is new and unfamiliar to us.
We are the world's first community to be displaced by climate change. Good day. I am Helen from the Carteret Islands in Papua New Guinea in the Pacific. Our homes, farms, schools, they are slowly sinking. We cannot grow our own food anymore, and so we had to leave. The sea has taken back our islands. The new place where we were brought to was a landlocked bush far from the sea. We are fishers. We know nothing about farming. We even have to walk 6 kilometers to school every day.
Our farm animals died, and we were also getting sick because there was no water. Assalamu alaikum. I am Kalia from Syria. We love our country, but it's nearly impossible for us to survive if we stay. It hasn't always been like this. Our family's farm was planted with cotton crops that were always thirsty for water. The crisis brought by drought contributed to violence that led to war. There wasn't much help from the government. We left the farms to look for work in the nearby cities, but there were no jobs available. We sold everything we had so we can pay boats to bring us to Europe. It's really scary. When we got to Europe, they turned us away. They said we can't stay there because we didn't have papers.
We have been walking for 2 weeks. I am very tired and my feet are full of blisters. Hola, I am Juan Patricio from Honduras. We left after the floods. Sometimes it gets very cold at night. During daytime, it's extremely hot. My mother says if we keep walking for 2 more months, we can reach Mexico and then the US. I hope they don't kick us out of America. I hope they understand our situation. When I was in school, I remember how we talked about human rights, the United Nations, and how people should help each other out.
Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, the right to work and education, and many more. Climate change adversely affects our human rights, especially for us who are already in vulnerable situations.
But why is it that when we move to other places, it seems like we do not have rights at all?
We, migrants, lose access to basic necessities.
Governments acknowledge climate change migration. We do not need just acknowledgement. We need commitment. We need justice. Rich countries and corporations are the greatest offenders in causing climate change. And yet the poorest countries and communities are the ones taking the worst impacts.
They should take the initiative to solve the problems they caused, because it's the right thing to do.
They said they would help, but actually they now ask us to pay for an insurance fee for when our crops are damaged.
It's not fair that they continue to benefit while we suffer. This has got to stop. This has got to change.
We started as victims, but we are also survivors.
We ask rich nations and corporations who are responsible for these to own up and pay up. We will sue those who are responsible for climate plunder. We demand official passports and refugee visas for displaced climate migrants. We ask that governments not to drive us away and respect our human rights.
We demand an international law on climate migrant rights.
We will continue to pressure governments, agencies, and institutions.
We have the right to move. We have the right to live in dignity.
We will not wait to die.
We are fighting back.
We are fighting back.
We are fighting
We
back.
are fighting back.
We are fighting back.